Chapter 3 of 3 Men and a Maid. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tim Bulkley of BigBible.org. 3 Men and a Maid by P.G. Wodehouse. Chapter 3. For some moments Sam remained where he was, staring after the girl as she flitted down the passage. He felt dizzy. Mental acrobatics always have an unsettling effect, and a young man may be excused for feeling a little dizzy when he is called upon suddenly and without any warning to readjust all his preconceived views on any subject. Listening to Eustace Hignett's story of his benighted romance, Sam had formed an unflattering opinion of this Wilhelmina Bennett, who had broken off her engagement simply because on the day of the marriage his cousin had been short of the necessary wedding garment. He had, indeed, thought, a little smugly, how different his goddess of the red hair was from the object of Eustace Hignett's affections. And now they had proved to be one and the same. It was disturbing. It was like suddenly finding the vampire of a 5-reel feature film turn into the heroine. Some men, on making the discovery of this girl's identity, might have felt that Providence had intervened to save them from a disastrous entanglement. This point of view never occurred to Samuel Marlowe. The way he looked at it was that he had been all wrong about Wilhelmina Bennett. Eustace, he felt, had been to blame throughout. If this girl had maltreated Eustace's finer feelings, then her reason for doing so must have been excellent and praiseworthy. After all, poor old Eustace! Quite a good fellow, no doubt, in many ways. But, coming down to brass tacks, what was there about Eustace that gave him any license to monopolize the affections of a wonderful girl? Where, in a word, did Eustace Hignett get off? He made a tremendous grievance of the fact that she had broken off the engagement. But what right had he to go about the place expecting her to be engaged to him? Eustace Hignett, no doubt, looked upon the poor girl as utterly heartless. Marlowe regarded her behaviour as thoroughly sensible. She had made a mistake, and, realizing this at the 11th hour, she had the force of character to correct it. He was sorry for poor old Eustace, but he really could not permit the suggestion that Wilhelmina Bennett, her friends called her Billy, had not behaved in a perfectly splendid way throughout. It was women like Wilhelmina Bennett, Billy to her intimates, who made the world worth living in. Her friends called her Billy. He did not blame them. It was a delightful name and suited her to perfection. He practised it a few times. Billy. 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 It certainly ran pleasantly off the tongue. Billy Bennett. Very musical. Billy Marlowe. Still better. We noticed among those present the charming and popular Mrs. Billy Marlowe. A consuming desire came over him to talk about the girl to someone. Obviously indicated as the party of the second part was Eustace Hignett, if Eustace was still capable of speech, and, after all, the boat was hardly rolling at all. He would enjoy a further chat about his ruined life. Besides, he had another reason for seeking Eustace's society. As a man who had been actually engaged to marry this supreme girl, Eustace Hignett had an attraction for Sam akin to that of some great public monument. He had become a sort of shrine. He had taken on a glamour. Sam entered the stateroom almost reverentially, with something of the emotions of a boy going to his first dime museum. The exhibit was lying on his back, staring at the roof of the berth. By lying absolutely still and forcing himself to think of purely inland scenes and objects, he had contrived to reduce the green in his complexion to a mere tinge. But it would be paltering with the truth to say that he felt debonair. He received Sam with a wan austerity. "Sit down," he said. "Don't stand there swaying like that. I can't bear it." "Why, we aren't out of the harbour yet. Surely you aren't going to be seasick already?" "I can issue no positive guarantee. Perhaps if I can keep my mind off it. I've had good results for the last 10 minutes, thinking steadily of the Sahara." "There," said Eustace Hignett with enthusiasm, "is the place for you. That is something like a spot. Miles and miles of sand and not a drop of water anywhere." Sam sat down on the lounge. You're quite right. The great thing is to concentrate your mind on other topics. Why not, for instance, tell me something more about your unfortunate affair with that girl, Billy Bennett, I think you said her name was. Wilhelmina Bennett. Where on earth did you get the idea her name was Billy? Well, I had a notion that girls called Wilhelmina were sometimes Billy to their friends. I never call her anything but Wilhelmina. But I really cannot talk about it. The recollection tortures me. That's just what you want. It's the counter-irritation principle. Persevere and you'll soon forget that you're on board ship at all. There's something in that, admitted Eustace reflectively. It's very good of you to be so sympathetic and interested. My dear fellow, anything that I can do. Where did you meet her first, for instance? At a dinner. Eustace Hignett broke off abruptly. He had a good memory, and he had just recollected the fish they had served at that dinner, a flabby, exhausted-looking fish, half sunk beneath the surface of a thick white sauce. And what struck you most forcibly about her at first? Her lovely hair, I suppose. How did you know she had lovely hair? My dear chap, I naturally assumed that any girl with whom you fell in love would have nice hair. Well, you're perfectly right. As it happens, her hair was remarkably beautiful. It was red. Like autumn leaves with the sun on them, said Marlowe ecstatically. What an extraordinary thing. That's an exact description. Her eyes were a deep blue, or rather green. Blue. Green. There is a shade of green that looks blue. What the devil do you know about the colour of her eyes? Demanded Eustace heatedly. Am I telling you about her, or are you telling me? My dear old man, don't get excited. Don't you see I'm trying to construct this girl in my imagination, to visualize her? I don't pretend to doubt your special knowledge, but after all, green eyes generally do go with red hair, and there are all shades of green. There is the bright green of meadow grass, the dull green of the uncut emerald, the faint yellowish green of your face at the present moment. Don't talk about the colour of my face. Now you've gone and reminded me, just when I was beginning to forget. Awfully sorry, stupid of me. Get your mind off it again, quick. What were you saying? Oh, yes, this girl. I always think it helps to form a mental picture of people if one knows something about their tastes, what sort of things they are interested in, their favourite topics of conversation, and so on. This Miss Bennett, now. What did she like talking about? Oh, all sorts of things. Yes, but what? Well, for one thing, she was very fond of poetry. It was that which first drew us together. Poetry! Sam's heart sank a little. He had read a certain amount of poetry at school, and once he had won a prize of 3 shillings and 6pence for the last line of a limerick in a competition in a weekly paper. But he was self-critic enough to know that poetry was not his long suit. Still, there was a library on board ship, and no doubt it would be possible to borrow the works of some standard poet and bone them up from time to time. Any special poet? Well, she seemed to like my stuff. You never read my sonnet sequence on Spring, did you? No. What other poets did she like besides you? Tennyson, principally, said Eustace Hignett with a reminiscent quiver in his voice. The hours we spent together reading the Idylls of the King. The which of what? Inquired Sam, taking a pencil from his pocket and shooting out a cuff. The Idylls of the King. My good man, I know you have a soul which would be considered inadequate by a common earthworm, but surely you have heard of Tennyson's Idylls of the King? Oh, those. Why, my dear old chap, Tennyson's Idylls of the King. Well, I should say. Have I heard of Tennyson's Idylls of the King? Well, really. I suppose you haven't a copy with you on board by any chance? There is a copy in my kit bag. The very one we used to read together. Take it and keep it or throw it overboard. I don't want to see it again. Sam prospected among the shirts, collars, and trousers in the bag, and presently came upon a morocco-bound volume. He laid it beside him on the lounge. Little by little, bit by bit, he said, I am beginning to form a sort of picture of this girl. This, what was her name again? Bennett. This Miss Bennett. You have a wonderful knack of description. You make her seem so real and vivid. Tell me some more about her. She wasn't keen on golf by any chance, I suppose? I believe she did play. The subject came up once, and she seemed rather enthusiastic. Why?